Hey everybody, welcome back to the Base Brief. This week, more evidence that COVID came from a lab leak. The student loan bailout is heading to the Supreme Court. Pfizer pays third-party payments to the NIH, and our quick hits roundup. This week, we'd like to welcome Jack back to the show. Hey, Jack.
Hey there, good to be here.
Glad to see you. Brad, as you all probably know from last week, is off in Puerto Rico posting very sunny selfies with his boyfriend. I'm having a little bit of FOMO, but that's okay. Jack, you're in Charleston this week?
I am. I'm enjoying the very cold 80-degree February we're having right now in Charleston.
Well, I am also not having terrible weather, and I will certainly take it. Brad and I were in Seattle last week for our debate with the Walkaway campaign at the University of Washington, and it was frigid. It literally snowed while we were there. And I think you'll relate to this. I don't ever know how to pack for places like Seattle because of having grown up in the South. Like, I just don't get their weather. So it said 45 degrees and some light rain. So I packed, a light trench coat and a scarf. And I thought that would be sufficient, but it was by no means sufficient. So anyways, but we had a good event. We were told the university was trying to shut us down at the last minute. We were told that there would be protesters, that the Socialist Club, because they have one of those, had canceled their event to come riot at our event, but nothing of the sort happened. We actually had a really good debate. Personally, I think we won by a landslide, so people can check that out on the Walkaway campaign's YouTube. And I will be heading to Pennsylvania this weekend. If anybody's in Pennsylvania, I'll be speaking at the Libertarian convention there. So mark your calendars. Hope to see some of you guys there. But we've got a lot to cover today, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into our top story. So, Jack, you've already written on this a good bit for Base Politics. I was really glad to see you covering it because it's kind of been a little bit more of my beat, but this is starting to become a much bigger deal. The U.S. Energy Department has assessed that the COVID-19 pandemic most likely came from a laboratory leak in China, according to a newly updated classified intelligence report. Two sources said that the Department of Energy assessed in the intelligence report that it had a quote, low confidence the COVID-19 virus accidentally escaped from a lab in Wuhan. Intelligence agencies can make assessments with either low, medium, or high confidence. A low confidence assessment generally means that the information obtained is not reliable enough or is too fragmented to make a more definitive analytic judgment, or that there is not enough information available to draw a more robust conclusion. Now, I want your reaction on that because a lot of people are trying to attack that part of this, that it's a low assessment belief. I think that makes perfect sense because they have not had access to the information they would need to say more definitively if this is the case, because Congress hasn't investigated this yet in over 2 years.
People in your everyday life, if they say something that they know is an outright lie or something that they thought was not true that they later turned out to be true, do they immediately say, oh my God, I was wrong, this is absolutely right? That's not how human beings generally operate, right? Everybody wants to save face. So this is the government or media or establishment version of that. Look, in the summer of 2020, Donald Trump started calling it the China virus. What did everybody say? This is racist. He's making it about Chinese people, which he's Donald Trump. Wouldn't be shocking if that's something that he might do, but that's what they said. On ABC News, after he started calling it the China virus, Mike Pompeo, who was in the Trump administration, told George Stephanopoulos that the evidence they had seen at the White House pointed to Wuhan and the lab there that is U.S. funded, as we later learned. So you would think the White House in the summer of 2020 might have a little bit more information than the average bear, correct? You don't have to like Trump or hate Trump or however you feel about Trump to agree with that basic statement, right? So we go on and on. We get to 2021, and Rand Paul starts grilling Anthony Fauci about the possibility of a lab leak. Fauci goes from, there was no lab leak. In fact, we don't do gain-of-function research at the Wuhan lab, and it's not even U.S. funded. Then you find out it is funded. You find out there is gain-of-function research. And Fauci's new answer is, well, it might be possible we did that. And then when this report came out, the Energy Department and the FBI already agrees with them that they buried the lead in both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times stories on this. The FBI agrees with the Energy Department that it is likely, with low confidence, back to the first thing I said about how human beings operate when they turn out to be wrong, that they think that the pandemic, the COVID-19 virus, originated in this Wuhan lab. So here we are, kind of admitting something that was dismissed as a fringe conspiracy theory. If you were on Facebook and posted a story about this or gave your opinion about this, it was labeled COVID misinformation for a very long time. But here we are, and I wrote a piece that's going to be coming out at Base Politics. That's the danger of combating misinformation. If we live in a free society where I have an opinion, you have an opinion, people who disagree with us have an opinion, if we can't debate these things freely and call out cranks and nonsense for what it is, but sometimes it turns out not to be that, we can't arrive at truth in any fashion. I don't care if it's scientific or just, plain speech, if we can't allow alternative views to be had. What we saw this week with the admission by the Energy Department, and this major story, depending on what outlet you read, it depends on how major it is that what was considered absolutely untrue and fringe conspiracy theory is the reality of how this thing was created that harmed so many people across the world for, 3 years, 2.5 years. And that's huge news. That's might be some of the biggest news of our lifetimes.
Yeah, well, and I want to be clear because I very much do believe that what happened to cause COVID is that we were funding illegal gain-of-function research, which is torturous of animals, in the Wuhan lab. And I believe that created the COVID virus, and I believe it was a leak. I don't think that it was a bioweapon. That's not something I personally ascribe to. We knew there were many issues with the Wuhan lab, many safety issues going on with the Wuhan lab for years before this actually got out. So I think that is the most likely scenario. That being said, that is my belief, and that belief is based on a significant amount of data and information that we now have, but we have not proven that yet. And that is why it is so important that Congress does investigate. I love this clip from Speaker Kevin McCarthy right now, who pointed out that this has not gone on for the past, 2.5, 3 years because Congress was under Democratic control, and they refused to even have these discussions. Now, at the very least, we are at least seeing Republicans start to scrutinize some of this. Let's roll this clip real fast.
Remember, for 2 years in the Democrat majority, they never had one hearing on the origins of COVID. We promised it in the Commitment to America. We have the Select Committee on COVID. And what's coming forward now is a lot of the information that they know we're going to get. They know that we're moving forward. We promised it.
And as somebody else pointed out, Joe Biden has still not even acknowledged this new report out of the Energy Department, which I also think is very interesting.
Now, we learned this, interestingly, from a newspaper. We did not learn it directly from the Biden administration because Joe Biden hasn't said a word about it. And that's a little odd. 1 million Americans, they tell us, died of COVID. Close to 7 million died globally. So it's inherently a big story. Now, it is true that the origin of COVID is not directly related to anti-trans racism. So it's not unnatural for Joe Biden. He doesn't have his talking points already written. But it might still make for a good topic for, say, a primetime address to the nation. He might mention it to us. He might answer a few other questions while he's at it. For example, is Joe Biden still sending money to China for biotech research? The administration was actually doing that, sending cash to that same Wuhan lab as recently as last year. Are they still doing that?
So all of this, I think, points to the need for us to get more information. I think that the American people deserve to know if our tax dollars were used. And I think that we've had a group I work for, the White Coat Waste Project, which is a free market animal welfare kind of taxpayer watchdog group. They've been pointing to this information since April of 2020. They literally started providing information to the Trump White House and then to the Biden White House, showing where these payments were going, showing the kind of research that they were seeing going on in these labs. And I think it's ridiculous that people were called racist for merely saying that there was evidence that this actually came from a lab in China. We were called conspiracy theorists. We, as you pointed out, were censored, were kicked offline. We had many of our leaders, thankfully Rand Paul has been consistent in pushing back on this, looking at the actual science as a doctor, but he got death threats for that, right? I remember people online literally saying, I hope his neighbor comes and finishes him off and things of that nature. It was disgusting the way that people acted around this. They very much did try to shut us down. And I feel now that we are being somewhat gaslit by the mainstream media in reaction to this report. I want to be very clear. Ecohealth Alliance, which is the pass-through nonprofit organization that the NIH and Fauci were sending our money through to Wuhan, they are still getting our taxpayer money as we speak. They've gotten $46 million in taxpayer dollars just since the pandemic began, and they got a new $4 million grant as recently as December. Joe Biden still says he supports gain-of-function research. This was in the National Review this week that said the Biden administration remains supportive of gain-of-function research despite the potential risk as long as that research is pursued in a safe and transparent manner, National Security Council Communications Coordinator, that's a long title, John Kirby said on Monday. The National Institutes of Health lifted that funding pause 3 years later after the creation of an oversight framework in 2021 and emerged since that point that U.S. taxpayers have been funding research into that coronavirus is at the Wuhan Institute of Virology through an intermediary, which was Ecohealth Alliance. So this is what we know. And despite these factors, I think most people just based on pure common sense would say Ecohealth Alliance should not be getting any more tax dollars. I think they would be saying gain-of-function research is too risky. There's a reason it was banned from 2014 through 2017. That ban should never have been lifted. And given what we know about where the money was going and the kind of research that was going on in that lab, there are good reasons to think that our tax dollars could have created this virus. We need answers to that, and we need to be able to put a stop to these things that are continuing to go on to ensure this never happens again. But as I want to go through in the media, they have been meeting every turn of events, every bit of new information we get on the subject has been met with derision, them poking holes in this story, saying that they don't have enough evidence yet to weigh in on this. And I think that's ridiculous because these are people with absolutely no evidence who ran around for 2 years trying to lock people in their homes, shut down schools, force people to wear cloth masks. They thought they had all the evidence in the world that was needed then. But now, as we're getting more and more credible information about the origins of this thing, and it goes against their narrative and makes them look like the hack jobs that they are, they're trying to gaslight us. Play this. Have you seen this clip from Stephen Colbert? Just this week, I want to roll this.
Now, if, like me, you're wondering why the Department of Energy is the one making this judgment, it's because that agency oversees a network of U.S. national laboratories, some of which conduct advanced biological research. No. Bad energy department. No biolabs until you finish building your electric car charging stations. Stay in your lane. You don't see the Census Bureau building nukes. But whatever. Who am I to say? They're the energy department. I'm sure they're smart. They wouldn't release these findings unless they were absolutely confident.
Okay, so stay in your lane. The energy department, which is under the Biden administration, can't have anything to say about this. Well, let's look at it this way. You know, Stephen Colbert, I loved his Comedy Central show. It was really funny. I don't know what the hell happened to him, but here's a guy who's a popular entertainer, who's a force in our popular culture, basically saying that, you know, he's dancing syringes and everybody must get vaccinated and ignoring the complications of this and just being a real a-hole in general, right, about something that's very complex. It's a life and death matter. It's affecting the entire country and the globe. Now he's saying because something disrupts his narrative, something disrupts his center-left worldview that, oh, Donald Trump might have been right, Rand Paul might have been right, these people in the Republican Party on the right, conservatives who thought this might have came from China, well, we shouldn't listen to a government agency under the Biden administration, under this president, a Democratic president, that have concluded with however they worded it, but have concluded or possibly think the most likely scenario is that the virus originated in a Chinese lab, which is what people that Colbert doesn't like has said for a long time. That's what he's saying. What he's saying is it hurts my feelings that what I believe about this might not be true. Not what's true, sure as hell not following the science. I'm Stephen Colbert. I represent the center left. My job every night on TV is to make fun of half of the country. That's my business model. And how dare they be right about something? That's what we're saying. And if that guy ever tries to tell me or you to follow the science again, he can kiss our...
Well, right. So it went from you're a racist or you're a conspiracy theorist, if you even suggest this, to, okay, maybe there is evidence of this, but it came from the wrong department that I don't know that much about, so it's not that credible. And so you can't attack my hack job, history of not actually being a true journalist and reporting on the real effects. Like, he is a propagandist, right? I feel like this
absolutely.
is what you see happen. It's like the overlords that kind of control the mainstream media are saying, dance monkey, go defend what we did for the past 2.5 years. And he trots on out there and puts on his tap shoes and dances around. He looks ridiculous.
Sorry to interrupt, Hannah, but obviously I'm animated. I'll try to calm down a little bit. But what we were talking about, Senator Rand Paul earlier, Rand Paul, when he was questioning Fauci, was doing the job of journalists. The job of journalists is the government says A and somebody challenged it saying B. Is A correct or is B correct? Let's investigate. Let's check it out. The job of a journalist in the pandemic, I would even argue pre-Trump, right before Trump, when everybody went crazy over Trump. I didn't vote for Trump, everybody. If it sounds like that, you're reading me all wrong. The job of a journalist is the government says this, the CDC says this, the Anthony Fauci says this. We have to protect it. We have to defend them. And how dare anybody out there ask questions? That's what Colbert was doing in that clip. They think that's their job, to protect the government establishment narrative. That's not journalism. That's why we started Based, Hannah. You and Brad and I have been talking about this forever. There needs to be independent media, alternative media. That's what we're doing. We're asking the questions. But no, the establishment, whether it's the media or politicians themselves, they think they have to protect their own.
That's right. We've been following the science and the data on this since day one, since it was not politically expedient to do. When we were first doing this, we were risking our Twitter profiles, our Facebook profiles, our Instagram profiles being shut down for daring to create content and say this, which might sound like a small deal, but that's our livelihoods. So I don't have any patience for these total they're just literally like little government puppets that run around pretending to be actual credible members of the media. They don't do their jobs. They never actually put their real lives on the line or their professions on the line to discover the truth. And they're worthless. And he is by no means the only person in his class that is doing this. Here's another clip from somebody on Comedy Central named Hassan Minhaj. Let's roll this.
But here's the key detail everybody's forgetting while they got the Twitter fingers. The Energy Department is one of 9 intelligence groups that have assessed COVID's origins. 2 have said lab leak, 5 say it came out of natural causes, and 2 say they don't know. And you know what? I personally side with them. I don't know what the is going on. FBI says this, NIC says that. I'm holding out until the DMV chimes in. Okay?
So I have so many issues with what he just said. I mean, once again, they're trying to, if you can't debunk the actual facts, what do? You attack the source, right? And that's what they're doing. They're coming after the Department of Energy and saying that they're not a credible source, that we're going to hold off till the DMV weighs in. But these are the people that believe anything from government as long as it tracks with their narrative, right? And they certainly were not needing such conclusive research and data around their other policies that they held so dear during the pandemic. So I think this is completely hypocritical. It's also just totally bogus because while I'm no proponent of government, period, the Department of Energy actually has a special division that as part of its mission is to track and mitigate the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And it specializes in the study of biological weapons such as viruses. There's a whole piece in the National Review this week detailing this. So to act like they don't have the ability to weigh in on this issue is ridiculous. And it is kind of indicative of the fact that all these government agencies have way too much power, way too much control, right? You've got IRS agents running around with guns. You've got all kinds of things happening under these agencies that don't always track, but that's big government for you. So it doesn't surprise me at all. The Department of Energy has this specialization and department, and I don't think there's anything less credible about them weighing in or the FBI weighing in than there is NIH. The NIH has been completely unreliable. They have blocked transparency at every turn. The government's whole idea about what was misinformation or disinformation and truth has been completely debunked. So I also don't really care, what the government says in general. I already kind of had my opinions based on how this thing got started from the data and the evidence and the money trails and all of that long ago. But I do think as you're seeing more government agencies having to back off their official narrative that this definitely came from somebody eating a bat in a wet market and there's no way we had anything to do with it. There's no way our tax dollars were complicit in this. That is significant. And that is why they are trying to run cover so hard and go after the Department of Energy. Because again, I think it does show them to be the completely hollow commentators that they are. And the mainstream media is dying for this reason. So they're trying to cover their tracks, but it doesn't play for me.
That's absolutely right. Look, we believe what we believe based on the bubbles we inhabit. And we also believe what we believe based on how it makes us feel. A lot of us don't want to admit that. Everything we believe is true. No, a lot of the times it's how it makes us feel. We're libertarians, Hannah, so we're very distrustful of government on its face. And sometimes government can be right, and sometimes it could be wrong. And you and I, as people who care about truth, should probably look at that honestly. But even we're partisans, right? We're all guilty of it. The people who believe the opposite, that believe in central planning, that trust the government, that love the government, talking about people who like socialism and the student loan bailouts and other things we'll get to later in this podcast, they trust government. They like government. So when the government says there was no collusion between Donald Trump and Russia after a 2-year investigation, but they've convinced themselves that it's true, what do they think? He definitely was. But the government said it wasn't. The 2-year investigation. No, the government's wrong in this case because of how it makes them feel. Truth has nothing to do with it. If the Energy Department says that the Wuhan lab was the source for this, but they've spent all these years believing it wasn't, it was other things, because it couldn't be, because that's a bad thing. That makes me feel bad, as just demonstrated by that Colbert clip earlier. It can't be true. These are not serious people, Hannah. If they were consistent and just believe government across the board, at least I could kind of respect that. It's how it makes them feel. There are right-wing versions of this all day long. Maybe that's a whole other podcast, but we're talking about this issue. Hannah, every department of government and Biden could come out and say it started in the Wuhan lab, and there are going to be large portions of the voter electorate in America be like, nope, did not. That hurts my feelings. Colbert, go do a skit about it. Make me feel better. That's where we're at. That's what we're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I thought this was really interesting to watch go down on Twitter. There was this one, I don't even want to call him a journalist because he's just a hack, but there's this guy named Mehdi Hasan who works for MSNBC, and he was going to town running defense for their sacred cows this week, which are, it's Fauci, right? Like if you can prove that they were wrong on this, on the very basis of the origins of the virus, then it does allow everything else that they've been trying to uphold to come into question, right? Anything else Fauci said or did, from masks to vaccines to lockdowns, they don't want to have to admit how colossally wrong they were for the past 2 years, because they ultimately got people killed. They ultimately broke the economy. They should never be listened to ever again. A lot of their future prospects hinges on them not having been so wrong over the past 2.5 years, because they want to continue to use these kind of public health loopholes in the law to push their agenda. And so there is something deeper going on here. But Nate Silver, he's a commentator on Twitter, he said the behavior of a certain cadre of scientists who used every trick in the book to suppress discussion of this issue is something I'll never forget. A huge disservice to science and public health. They should be profoundly embarrassed. Mehdi Hasan, he quote tweeted this. He said, the simple reason why so many people weren't keen to discuss the lab leak quote theory is because it was originally conflated by the right with Chinese bioweapon conspiracies and continues to be conflated by the right with anti-Fauci conspiracies. Blame the conspiracy theorists, which I just thought was such an egregious statement. Like, no. You guys in the media conflated it with racism and with right-wing conspiracy theories, right? That was not the right. That was you, because you wanted to suppress the discussion and you wanted to make it to where people were scared to talk about this. So to say that this is something the right did is bogus. I responded to him. I said, no, we're going to blame the media, government officials, and the quote experts that knowingly and willfully misled the American people and tried to silence dissent for 3 years. Thanks. He responded to me yet again. He said, yes, the big scandal of the pandemic was not 1 million dead, not the president saying to inject disinfectant, not anti-vaxxers running rampant, but scientists mostly agreeing that the coronavirus came from a Chinese wet market, not actually leaked from a Chinese lab. So he's trying to downplay this, but this is nothing to be downplayed. If we funded this thing illegally and created a global pandemic, right? But they're trying to say, look over here, there's anti-vaxxers. Look over here, the President Trump was crazy. We know President Trump was crazy. That's besides the point. You're also crazy. And this is a huge scandal, and it's something that needs to be looked into. And I'm just so fed up with them completely moving the needle. And I think this is why people have to be really, really careful when we get into these conversations around disinformation, but also around content moderation. And I have a bone to pick with Republicans right now, because while Democrats have certainly been worse with trying to come in and police disinformation, which I'll get into in just a second, Republicans are still out here in these streets trying to reform Section 230. You've got Republicans in Texas and Florida who have passed content moderation bills, giving the freaking government power to moderate content, as if they think Democrats can never take their state or ever get their hands on that power. And they are playing right into the hands of these people by continuing to work to give the government more control over social media, more control over content, and think it's going to play out for them. It's not. It's going to lead to more suppression, which is exactly what we saw. Robbie Suave, I thought, pointed out something great. He said, the Global Disinformation Index, which we covered last week, he said they had flagged Reason and other publications as risky news sites and implied that they spread misinformation, but they wrongfully identified the Chinese cover-up as a racist conspiracy theory in a report to their advertisers. So while they're coming in here and saying these media outlets aren't trustworthy, they're using this Chinese cover-up and saying it's a racist conspiracy theory. Don't support anybody who dares to talk about these things because it's racism. This is the kind of people you're empowering, right? That's the State Department funded thing. These are the people you're empowering when you want to come in and try to reform Section 230 or pass content moderation bills. And the right has got to wise up at some point because they do not know how to play chess.
No. And look, this is distraction and deflection from what's really important. In Hassan's defense, and you were right in your reply to him, the MSNBC pundit, Marco Rubio did float. He was one of the people who talked about the Wuhan lab leak being a potential, origin, 2021, I believe it was. He did float the idea that it was possibly a bioweapon. That's because Marco Rubio is always looking to get in the war any way he can. And so he added that to positing that theory, correct? So it didn't come from nowhere. Most, if not all, other people who talked about the Wuhan leak theory did not go in that direction. And now you have people like Hassan and others saying, oh, that's what the right's saying. And they conflate the two and use that to dismiss it. But yes, Hannah, the idea that U.S. tax dollars were used for this, and this, by the admission of government agencies, might be the root of this. And the idea that we wouldn't talk about it because we had a Democratic majority until this session. These are the same people who had hearing after hearing about January 6th. Tell us we're crazy people who don't follow the science and we don't value truth and safety. Nah. And I think more and more Americans see that than ever. I think more and more Americans don't trust the partisan narratives that come out of right or left. I think the left sort of controls the cultural institutions, entertainment, things like that. Certainly legacy media. It doesn't control things like Based and our friend Robbie Suave, who you mentioned, and others. But I don't think they control who was it that said that Reason should be on a, hate watch list or whatever the hell it was. I mean, good God.
Global Disinformation Index. Yeah, that he's mentioning here.
Right. So those are the kind of people in control. And I think they're losing all credibility. So the silver lining to this is that. Like, let's find some truth. Let's talk about what's real. Let's talk about if there was a lab leak that we funded and the damage it did, who was responsible, and hold them accountable. I think we're getting there. We've talked about it on this podcast, and I think we're getting closer to it more than ever, hopefully.
All right. Well, I'll close out this segment with one other Nate Silver tweet that I absolutely agree with. He said, I certainly don't think the truth always wins out, but I also think professional media people have extremely naive theories about what happens when they try to suppress information they don't like, because we're not going to forget. I will never forget what they've done over the past 2.5 years. I hated the government. I hated, this kind of establishment for a long time, but this has just really amped it up for me. And we won't be forgetting, and I don't think we're going to let this die. So chickens are going to come home to roost. I'm grateful to see there's a growing movement calling for Congress to thoroughly investigate these origins from the states. We've seen a bill by our friend Eric Brakey that he tried to bring in Maine. Briscoe Cain is another friendly lawmaker down in Texas that did introduce this resolution. I've heard that Colton Moore is bringing it here in Georgia. So there's something happening here where people are really starting to rise up, and I think we're going to get some answers sooner than later. So, but this is important. This is why you need to follow Base Politics, support our work, because we have to have independent media. We have to have independent watchdog groups like the White Coat Waste Project to get this kind of information. Nobody else is doing that work for you. It's very important. All right, with that being said, I'm going to transition us to our next segment. We have something going down today. So this episode will actually air tomorrow, which is Wednesday. But today on Tuesday, while we're filming, the Supreme Court is hearing 2 cases that are blockbuster cases revolving around the student loan bailout that Biden has tried to pass. So, Jack, I think you're pretty up to speed with the student loan bailout movement. Let's roll this clip for our listeners just to remind everybody what the policy is that Biden is trying to pass and why it is being challenged in courts.
Yeah, there's an interesting psychological threshold there for all those people who've been, the student loans have been on pause forever during the pandemic. Both the Trump administration and Biden administration have extended that pause. And now if you had to start paying again, what would that do? Well, the Biden administration wants to cancel $10,000 in federal student loan debt for people who make less than $125,000 a year or households below $250,000. Now, those who receive Pell Grants would be able to receive $10,000 more than that for a total of $20,000 in relief. But Republican leaders in 6 states have tried to block that plan, arguing that it didn't go through the correct process and that its estimated cost of $400 billion is just too much for other taxpayers to bear. So today, the Supreme Court is going to hear at least 2 hours of arguments And the question they're going to be focused on is whether or not the 6 states have the standing or the legal right to block the Biden administration's action. To decide that, the Supreme Court is going to have to decide if the 6 states are actually harmed by the Biden plan. Now, in the meantime, the plan itself has been put on hold by lower court judges, meaning student loan borrowers are left in the lurch here while the battle rages on over the fate of their own debt.
So, Jack, Brad and I have talked about this extensively. This is one of Brad's pet subjects he likes to rant about. And I think most people know where we stand, but I'll give you the floor to kind of weigh in here on just why this is such a bad idea and why we're so opposed to what Biden is doing here or trying to do.
You know, the constitutionality is going to be decided, and it's obvious to us and many listening that it is completely unconstitutional to even propose something like this. But in terms of what it means in our politics and our culture, what it means to the average person who might be out there listening to this, it's the old adage, I worked myself, crazy to put myself through college, had 3 jobs and paid for it myself, and boy, what a fool was I. I should have never done that. You have the clips, I think, good God, going back as far as 2016 with the working father talking to Hillary Clinton saying, because they were proposing this then too, this is not new, saying, why did I pay to put my kid through college? This is an insult to me. We're talking about working class people, right? That really hits home with a lot of people. It is so unfair to do that on so many levels. And I think that's just something people can't get out of their heads. And I think elites don't get that. This is something that helps. More people with means end up going to universities and colleges than people without means. So it's a bailout for the upper echelon of society, and they don't see it that way. Because they can't see past their own hypocrisy often. But I think that will hurt them politically. I think it as a moral judgment is just something they can't comprehend. But the average person out there certainly can comprehend and will react accordingly, I think, at the ballot box or elsewhere.
Yeah, so you make a good point. I actually wrote about this for Base this week. Fewer than 1 in 5 Americans currently have a student loan. The vast majority of Americans have never had a student loan. That's because less than 50% of people even have a degree. So this is something that disproportionately will help the wealthier and elites. We have lots of data showing that it predominantly helps doctors and lawyers. And it is essentially a corporate welfare bailout for these institutions. And I was looking into the popularity of the program. It's not even all that popular. Even the people who are sort of okay with the student loan bailout say what they really want to see happen is a fix to the underlying problems of why college got so expensive, which is, of course, because of government getting involved in the market in the first place. You could never have these schools charging $30,000, $40,000 a year to go there if it weren't for government subsidizing that. And that's simply because most people could not afford to pay $30,000 to $40,000 per year. The private market would not lend you $30,000 to $40,000 a year for most of these degrees. Therefore, if colleges wanted to have the same amount of students attending them as they currently do, they would have to lower their cost. They'd have to be more frugal. The fact that they are not doing that and that the government wants to come in and bail them out for basically selling worthless degrees to people that they can't afford to pay back based on the income they're actually making with that degree in the market, that's corporate welfare. And I'm just so tired of the left trying to pretend that they're anti-corporations. No, you're not. You constantly want to come in and bail them out. It's a terrible idea, and as a whole would actually just increase the problem. It would allow colleges to continue jacking up their prices, selling worthless degrees. The price of an education would continue to skyrocket, and we would just be left with the tabs. So it's an atrocious policy, but what makes it even more atrocious is the fact that he has been unilaterally told no, right? Congress has refused to pass this. He cannot even get, the vast majority of the Democrats to agree to it because this is such a bad idea. It's so economically expensive. We're already in an inflationary period. Anybody with just basic data in front of them is not going to go for this. But instead of doing what he should do as president, which is recognizing this isn't the will of the people and he can't get the votes, he instead is trying to use an old loophole, basically this law that was passed around the 9/11 era, giving the department or giving the education secretary the ability to put on hold or modify the federal student loan system during a national emergency. And that is what they are using to try to cancel it. So that's what these cases are going to hinge on is, do they have the authority? Now, it says they have the authority to modify. This is something called the HEROES Act. says they have the authority to modify or pause. It doesn't say they can come in and just unilaterally wipe out billions of dollars, right? That's not in the bill. So it's quite a stretch. Even Nancy Pelosi has said that she does not believe they have the authority to do this. So it's kind of a Hail Mary that I think, were trying to do before the midterms to rally support. They now have 2 challenges, and they thought they wouldn't get challenged, right? That was the first obstacle. They thought that you wouldn't be able to challenge them because there is this problem of who has what's known as standing. In order for a court case to proceed, the plaintiffs have to prove that they have standing, which means they have to show that they've been personally, financially harmed or otherwise harmed by a law. When you have something that is this broadly applied, it is somewhat difficult to do. So there's 2 challenges coming. One is based off 2 individuals who say that the policy is discriminatory towards them because of the kind of loans that they hold. It wouldn't apply to them. And the other is by a group of red states, basically, who are coming in and suing and saying this would be very financially expensive for them. So that's the first hurdle we have to clear before the Supreme Court, is to see if it's ruled that these plaintiffs actually do have standing. If it's allowed to proceed, given the makeup of the court, which is a 6-3 conservative majority, we are inclined to think that they're going to rule against this. The Supreme Court tends to be increasingly standing up against big government regulation and expansion of powers, but not always, right? There have been several executive orders under both Biden and Trump that they've allowed to stand. So we can't say for sure, but what I'm really excited about as a Supreme Court nerd, I love litigation. I absolutely thrive on it. There's something that's happening in the court system. I've mentioned it on the podcast a little bit ago. I think it was earlier last summer when EPA versus West Virginia was decided. But that was a big case because that involved West Virginia suing the EPA over basically trying to pass this very expensive for them program that they didn't have the constitutional authority to pass. And in the past, we've seen courts be really overly deferential to the agencies, right? And say that this is what they have been created to do, is to create these kinds of rules and regulations. And that stopped with EPA versus West Virginia. They ruled in favor of West Virginia, not EPA. And in the dominant decision, they referenced something called the major questions doctrine, which is why I'm hype about this. So major questions doctrine is a way of evaluating laws that the conservative courts are increasingly using, of saying, did Congress explicitly give you the power to set these kinds of policies or laws or regulations? And if they didn't, and if this particular thing you're trying to do has significant financial or societal impact, then you have to have congressional authority to do this, which is super based and constitutional, because unelected bureaucrats and agencies should not be writing the laws. They should not be able to come in and rewrite the economy. But that is largely what they've been doing for the past couple of decades. The number of regulations that we see passed every year has significantly dwarfed the number of laws that are passed. Congress quit doing its job. They have largely relegated the job of making laws to the executive and to these unelected agencies. The major questions doctrine can put a stop to that, because it literally tells courts that unless Congress has explicitly given these agencies that power, you should rule against their ability to do this. And so I have a good feeling we're going to see that come into play with this case. And if it does, that will be the second time that it is utilized. And that creates what's known as precedent in the law. And as you start to get more and more precedent, these things get baked into how courts function. And I think ultimately it could lead to a domino effect where we start seeing a lot more big government regulations struck down. So that's why I'm pretty amped about this whole case.
That is hopeful. The major questions doctrine could create that precedent. But let me get this straight, Hannah, just so I understand what you're saying. You're saying that this administration, a president, the executive branch, is trying to use wartime powers to shape domestic policy, not foreign policy? I can't believe it. I mean, the Patriot Act is only for going after terrorists, right? Whatever the hell they passed after 9/11 had everything to do with student loan bailouts. You see what I'm getting at. But you're absolutely right. They're going to do that every time they can, use that executive power, circumvent the Constitution. Something like the major questions doctrine, setting that precedent, can help us rein in big government. And, all Republicans talk about that. Can we do it? Let's see. Maybe this is the answer to that. But yeah, very, very hopeful about this.
It's certainly a life raft. I see progressive policies and spending as this stream that's rushing down river and it's about to wipe us all out and drown us. And I see conservatives and libertarians like us as little beavers. And the major questions doctrine is our wood, and we're building a dam to try to stop that river from knocking us all out.
That's a great visual. Yeah.
And so be a litigation nerd with me, follow this case, but I think there's some really, it's exciting what could happen there. So Fingers crossed on that. All right, so Jack, buckle up for our next segment. This one is quite the doozy. This is something we've covered at Based Politics in the past, but I feel like it's kind of flown under the radar somehow because this is one of the more shocking stories I think that we kind of dip into. So we have discovered in recent months that Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies are paying third-party payments to scientists at the NIH. And we got this information from a nonprofit called Open the Books, and they are devoted to posting online all of the disclosed spending of every level of government across the United States. And they just released a full breakdown on their efforts to follow third-party royalties at the NIH, and it is spicy. They sent out a few bullet points along with a clip I'm going to roll in just a second, but a couple highlights. They said that since 2010, the NIH has hid $1.4 billion in third-party royalties paid by companies like Pfizer that enrich the agency, its leaders, and its scientists. They said that in September of 2020, their auditors at Open the Books filed a Freedom of Information Act, a FOIA, for third-party royalty databases at the NIH. Since 2005, there had been no sunshine on those royalty databases. The NIH, of course, ignored their request, so they partnered with Judicial Watch and filed a federal lawsuit. And together, they forced the NIH to produce 3,000 pages of third-party royalty transactions. Let's roll these clips real fast.
Today, with the help of a watchdog group, we look at the issue of government scientists collecting royalty payments from pharmaceutical companies for discoveries made while working on your dime.
So our data shows at openthebooks.com that every single year, NIH doles out $32 billion in federal grant making to 56,000 entities. And that basically buys you the entire American healthcare space.
Adam Andrzejewski of the watchdog group Open the Books says the National Institutes of Health, or NIH, accumulates great influence with the power to decide which scientists and projects get all those taxpayer billions.
Buys you a lot of friends, buys you a lot of allies, and there's great incentive to stay on the establishment narratives that NIH disseminates on public health policy.
Under a 1984 law known as Bayh-Dole, government scientists have a unique arrangement. They can collect royalties from pharmaceutical companies for discoveries they make while working for us.
So here's how the third-party royalty complex works. You have a government scientist funded by taxpayers, and they work in a government lab that's also funded by taxpayers. And when they have an invention, they have a special situation. The NIH, National Institutes of Health, then licenses that invention.
An invention meaning a drug or a device?
Yes.
Okay.
Or therapeutic, to the private sector. And the private sector then pays royalties back to NIH. NIH then distributes those royalties on a royalty split schedule back to the scientist.
First and foremost, this is, to me, the thing I want every single person to have to watch when they say that our healthcare system is broken because of capitalism. Our healthcare system is almost completely government run at this point and funded, and you have this very incestuous relationship where basically the healthcare companies are then giving kickbacks to the scientists, and the scientists are then telling them what to say, and they decide what kind of funding they get, and it is absurd. Like, there is, when you have this kind of thing going on, who could possibly say what is true? Who could possibly say if the American people are getting the best, innovations or discoveries? Like, these people are working for each other. They're not working for us. And I think that this is something that should so obviously be outlawed. It's a huge scandal, and yet it has quietly flown under the radar for years, for decades.
The most damaging collusion happening in the modern United States is not between a foreign power and the head of our own state, but between big business and big government. We were talking about student loan bailouts and the state of education earlier, and now we're talking about healthcare and these mysterious third-party payments that nobody wants to talk about. Once again, why aren't these major stories? Why is it up to a United States senator who doesn't work at the Washington Post or the New York Times or MSNBC or CNN to have to grill Anthony Fauci about these things, for Fauci not to tell us, and no other journalists see the signs I'm making, following up and asking why? Why would you answer Senator Paul? It is ridiculous, Hannah, that so many people blame our problems, healthcare included, which is what we're talking about right now, on capitalism, on the free market, when nothing could be further from the truth. Most of the people listening to this podcast realize this, but we can't say it enough and we can't say it loud enough. This stuff needs to be known about, reported on. We're talking about it now. We do what we can, but this is just absurd that it's flown under the radar for so many.
Yeah. And speaking of Rand Paul, he actually approached us at Base Politics last year with this information because he discovered this in his office. He got a lot of the data, and he came to us to break the story, and we ran this story first. We were the first ones that broke it. Brad actually authored that piece. And
I think Rand needs a fedora with the press sign in it, like he's the best reporter around. But continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Right. Like, not only is he like punching 1,000 when it comes to being a great senator, he's also like over here doing the full job of the media and the scientific community. Like, he put this country on his back, man. That's what I have to say for him. Now, speaking of Rand, though, I want to roll these clips where he confronted Dr. Anthony Fauci with this information. This is going to make your blood boil. Let's roll this.
Can you tell me that you have not received a royalty from any entity that you ever oversaw the distribution of money in research grants?
Well, first of all, let's talk about royalty.
That's the question. No, that's the question. Have you ever have you ever received a royalty payment from a company that you later oversaw money going to that company?
You know, I don't know as a fact, but I doubt it.
It's not just about you. Everybody on the vaccine committee, have any of them ever received money from the people who make vaccines? Right. Can you tell me that? Can you tell me if anybody on the vaccine approval committees ever received any money from people who make the vaccines?
Soundbite number one, are you going to let me answer a question? Okay, so let me give you some information. First of all, according to the regulations, people who receive royalties are not required to divulge them, even on their financial statement, according to the Bayh-Dole Act.
And he literally told Congress, more or less, it's none of your business. I don't have to tell you these things.
So he will not answer the question, are people who are on the approval committee for vaccines getting kickbacks from vaccine companies? He won't answer it. He's very agitated. He basically says he doesn't know. Then he says they don't have to disclose that thanks to this really corrupt law that basically says they don't have to disclose it on their financial statements. This is as corrupt as it gets. And then he essentially basically does say, this is none of your business, this isn't Congress's business. You can tell he's outraged that he's even being asked this. How dare you ask him such a thing? How dare you expose his grift and his community's grift that they've been profiteering off of for God only knows how long? This is heinous, and it's even more heinous. I am not an anti-vaxxer at all, right? This is an issue that, God, until COVID, I managed to sidestep. One of the top DMs I used to get before COVID was, what do you think about the anti-vaccine movement? And I was like, what I think is I'm really glad I don't have kids and I don't have to think about this. And then COVID happened, and I all of a sudden had to think about it because you have the government not only fast-tracking approvals for a vaccine, but then having the audacity to come in and try to mandate that people put this in their bodies. And there are countless Americans to this day who took those drugs, not because they wanted to, not because they felt they had the information that they needed to make a good healthcare choice for themselves, but because the Biden administration, upheld by the Supreme Court, threatened their employers and told them that they had to get vaccinated in order to earn a living. And now we find out that these kickbacks were going back and forth between these companies. This is criminal. These people should be prosecuted. Tear the whole thing down.
Absolutely. Look, that exchange, you can see it with Fauci and the senator. If you go back and look at the early headlines from the original back and forth with Fauci and Rand Paul, the sort of center-left publications, it was headlines like, Fauci eviscerates Rand Paul. Fauci tears apart, stuff like that, right? What they're essentially saying, what Fauci is saying in those exchanges, he's mad, like, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. He's mad that Senator Paul touched a nerve, that he asked about something that was true, whether it's the payments or any of the other things he asked. And the left perception was Fauci destroyed him because he told him he's wrong without ever examining what did Senator Paul ask and what was the response by this government official. And the response is important, because you need to answer these things because they're important. And let me ask you this, Hannah, what kind of punishment or, repercussions is Fauci ever going to face for not answering these questions? A man in the know, who's in the position he is supposed to have the answers to these questions. I'm not going to answer. Rand Paul, you're a jerk for even asking them. That's the response. Mm-hmm. And that's what we're supposed to accept and even praise him for. No, that's messed up from top to bottom.
And let's keep in mind that it took a sitting senator questioning him, a sitting senator exposing this information, a nonprofit filing FOIAs, and finally a lawsuit just to get this bare bones information out of them. I want to roll this clip about how even now that we have the lawsuit, how much they were able to redact and still hide from us.
So during the pandemic, I think the American people started to ask the question, just how close is big government to big pharma?
Open the Book sued to try to get some of the hidden answers. That lawsuit unearthed 3,000 pages of royalty payments to NIH scientists from 2010 to 2021. During that time, 2,407 government scientists received $325 million in secretive royalty payments, averaging out to more than $135,000 each. But much is left unknown. NIH redacted or blacked out key details.
We don't know who paid it. We don't know how much each individual scientist received. We can only see their names and count the number of times that each scientist received a payment. And they also redacted the invention, the license number or the patent number.
So this is what's crazy to me is this is still the only information we can get. So we still don't know, as he says, who actually made these payments, who exactly got them, what the payment amounts were for. There's still so much up in the air. And this is the kind of thing that when it gets exposed, I am just livid that our government is spending their time investigating stupid things like January 6th instead of this. This should be the story of the century. This should be the top of every news segment. And yet hardly anybody even mentions it. And that just makes me very depressed for the state of our country and where we're going, because I think you're right. I don't think there's much that's going to happen, if I'm being completely candid. I don't think there's going to be real accountability. I don't think you'll ever see any, not only not see prosecutions or charges over some of this, you're not ever going to even know who was involved. And that is where we're at as a country.
And not a single person was fired for the intelligence failures of 9/11. That's been two decades ago. This is a different disaster tragedy on a different scale, and I don't expect anybody to be fired for informational failures, intelligence, whatever you want to call it, failures to govern or be right or moral, ethical, or to do what they were elected to do, or unelected people doing things they shouldn't do. I don't think anybody will ever be held accountable, but we'll try.
All right. Well, let's move on to our quick hit segment. We've got a few videos we want to react to for you this week. I've been mining TikTok as I do. You're welcome. The first one, though, actually came from Fox News, and there is a video of a guy who believes that you should have to switch seats with him if he wants your seat on an airplane. Well, let's roll this video of a man recently who felt that you absolutely did owe him your seat if he decided he wanted it.
All right, guys, we have a real rant today, a serious rant. I encountered an absolute today on the plane, and I wanted to slap him, but I didn't because I was on a plane and I had to restrain myself. But hear me out. Tell me if it's justified, if it's not justified. So when I booked the flights, we booked here. This is Virgin Business. There's only 8 seats on the plane. So Zoe was sitting over there on the far left. I don't know where my finger's gone. Far left. And I was sitting here in that seat. So this seat and that seat were both taken. But I was like, it's fine because either this guy here next to the aisle, he swaps with me, gets the exact same seat on the opposite side, or this guy gets his window seat on the other side. Easy, yeah? No matter what, me and Zoe are sitting together. Wrong. We're not sitting together. We walk onto the plane and this gene is here in this seat. I politely ask him, hey, like, bro, would you mind moving so I can sit with my missus? It's her birthday. And he just looks at me and doesn't respond. And I was like, I've got this seat, so it's sort of the same. Like, is it possible if you switch to here? He just doesn't respond to me. And then he's like, no, I won't. But I'll sit here. So he wants to take Zoe's seat and go and sit on the window. Zoe's not a great flyer. She can get super nauseous, blah, blah, blah. So she always needs to sit next to a window. Cool. That's on us. No worries, right? But either way, he's either getting this seat, which is in the exact same spot, just on the other side of the aisle, but he won't take that. He's like, nah, I'll only move to here. So he'll make us sit either side of the aisle. Just for no reason. There's literally no reason. It's the same seat. So anyway, I'm like, bro, really? Like, you sure you can't just swap seats to this? And he just doesn't respond to me. And I was like ready to literally lay into this guy. But anyway, so Zoe goes and sits in her seat. And then I'm sitting here. And this gronk is sitting in between us. Zoe says like, hey, excuse me, like, you know, is it possible for us to switch seats? Like, is there some sort of problem? Like, you know, whatever. It's my birthday today. Like, I would like to sit with my partner, whatever. And he's like, nah, no problem. Just not moving. Like, what the am I missing something? Can somebody explain to me what the hell is going on here? It's the same seat, just on a different side of an aisle. Can somebody please tell me what the hell is going wrong here? Surely I'm not in the wrong. Somebody please tell me. Anyway, my man over here, he was sitting at this window. He was kind enough, I asked him politely, he was kind enough to switch and take Zoe's seat in the end. We ended up in these two. But he couldn't really speak English very well. But this guy, best believe I told him about it when we got off the plane. I really told him about it. But am I in the wrong or I'm in the right? This is a really long video, but guys, it just had to be done.
Okay, so my problem with this is that he admits that when they went to book their seats, that basically they couldn't book the seats that they wanted together. So somebody else had already picked their seat. I think as somebody who flies a lot, where you sit on an airplane matters, right? Like I care a lot that I'm situated where I want to be. It impacts my comfort. It impacts my health because I get back issues when I fly. A lot of people get nauseous or get anxiety on flights. There's also the matter of connections and layovers, and sometimes you need to be able to get off the flight more quickly. Who knows what a person's reasons are for picking a seat that they want? But I don't think anybody owes you their seat. I agree. Like I would typically make accommodations when and if I could, but this is one of many iterations I've seen of this trend online where people feel absolutely entitled to basically have somebody else move. Often you've paid extra to sit in a certain seat that you want, and yet they feel like they have every right to come in and make you move. And if you don't, they do this thing where they go online and try to publicly shame you. And I think this is disgusting.
No, I agree. And I was going to say the same thing you just said. I mean, how often do you go on there and you get, seats that you prefer and you pay a little extra? That just doesn't matter anymore? You're going to throw it out the window? No, you get what you pay for. Let's just stick to that.
I agree. So I'm tired of this trend. I think this guy is completely in the wrong. And I also just don't understand. If things don't go your way in general, please stop running to social media. Like sometimes things aren't fair. Sometimes you don't get everything you want in a given day. It's just completely immature and childlike, I think, to come in and make this kind of thing into not only a TikTok, but then he's gone to the Daily Mail, it looks like. This has been covered by different outlets. Like, why is this your 15 minutes of fame? Please create something. Please do something for the world to get your 15 minutes of fame. This is just, it's such a bottom dweller kind of activity. I can't handle it. Okay, well, the next video poses an important question. I'm curious what you think, Jack. Do you believe that beautiful women get bullied more?
I don't know how to answer that because I'm not a woman. I mean, I am beautiful. Let's face it. We have to accept that. But I'm not a woman. I don't know how to answer that question, Hannah. I think that's better perspective from you, probably.
Well, according to this TikToker, they do. I want to roll it first.
Contrary to what you see in the movies, beautiful women actually get socially targeted more. And this uptick in bullying comes from other women. Why? Well, women use bullying, specifically gossip, as a weapon in the fight for mates. Gossip works by damaging the reputation, the mate value, or the desirability of the target. If you're more beautiful, other women will, sometimes subconsciously, perceive you as a greater threat in the competition for the mates they desire. And so they'll try to reduce your mate value by telling everyone you're promiscuous, or fake, or narcissistic, or some other such nonsense.
Okay, so maybe I am a little triggered by this video because I think this is accurate. I really do. There's this perception that you get bullied more if you're not as attractive or some of these, things that we look down on in society. But I actually agree that often you see really pretty girls get bullied the most. And I'm not even going to use myself as an example here. I've seen this happen to other women that I consider to be really, really beautiful. One of my sister's good friends in high school went on to become a Victoria's Secret model. She's absolutely stunning, beautiful girl. She got the heck bullied out of her in school. I really do think you almost see when a beautiful woman walks into a room, women kind of mark her as that's the competition. That's the one that has to be taken down. It's very animalistic and it's weird. And I've also noticed this in relationships. I've had multiple times where I would start dating a guy, their girlfriends or I don't know, other women, colleagues that they worked with would just immediately have a problem with me and not like me and would pick out something really arbitrary. Oh, she's a conservative. She's probably really mean. Or yeah, I had one time group of girls at this conference within the Liberty Movement were bullying me when I started dating a guy that also worked at the Liberty Movement. And one of them went up to him and literally was like, she seems really clingy, which I still think is so funny because I am the least clingy, the most independent person you'll ever meet. What? So I have to say, PSA, this happens more than you think. And people need to just stop it and be nice and be happy with yourselves and quit picking on other people. I just can't stand this side of society. All right. Well, our next video, I think you'll have a bit more to say about Jack. So I saw this video on TikTok of this woman who is complaining about having to pay for people's health care when she goes to a restaurant in tip form. They've added a service charge, and she thinks it's outrageous that you should have to pay for people's health care. Let's roll this clip.
I recently found another example of why I hate living in the U.S. I went to brunch with a group of people a little while ago, and when the waitress brought out the tab, I noticed this 3.5% for staff benefits. And so I asked our waitress, I'm like, what is this staff benefits charge? And she's like, yeah, that's so that we can have health care. And I was flabbergasted. So you're telling me every 2 weeks it's money taken out of my check to pay for my health insurance, just so that when I go to the doctor, I still got to pay them more money to treat me, and then pay more money to get my meds from the pharmacy. And now companies are allowed to just put the burden of paying for their employees' health care on customers? What?
I guarantee you this woman wants socialized healthcare and free healthcare for all. You know that's true, right? And she doesn't even put it together that, like, yeah, you're going to be paid for that. She's outraged that there's a, what do they call it, a server's benefit, which is for their healthcare, which is fair. And that's good. It's the free market, private businesses deciding to do this. And she's outraged by it. I don't know this woman's politics. I probably shouldn't say that, but there is a high chance that she believes in free healthcare for all and is still outraged by this.
Well, she doesn't explicitly say it in these terms in the video, but she does indicate that she thinks this is a problem the restaurants and that companies are basically doing, right? Her whole thing is that this is a capitalist system and these companies are doing this. And of course, you kind of follow her line of reasoning. She thinks this is corporate greed. She thinks that this is basically the companies passing on the cost of their workers' health care to her. And it's hilarious to me because she doesn't realize that if you had socialized health care, the cost would be passed on to you still. And also that the costs are always passed on to you. Anytime somebody has to hire an employee, the price of that includes health care, and that gets baked into the prices that you pay for their product or service that you're purchasing from the business. Like, these people cannot put one and one together, and it blows my mind, just the complete lack of logical thinking in our school system. We need to actually start teaching people how to think. This is not it.
I was just going to say she doesn't have to go to that restaurant. If it's free healthcare for all, she has to pay her taxes. But that doesn't register with a lot of people.
They just think that money comes from trees, and they have no clue how things get made. I guess I don't know what they think would happen I guess they think if you have socialized healthcare, it would just be the billionaires paying, all 800 of them would just be picking up the cost for 330 million people's healthcare. It's fantasy land, man. But I don't know. I found this highly amusing. So thanks for the laugh. All right, let's move on to our mailbag. We had some on our videos from the debate this week, which again went really well. So I'll read a couple of those. Rachel said, watch the stream of that debate and you guys were great. Also appreciated that you could get your point across without screaming, using profanity, etc. And you spoke about wanting to work together and bridge gaps instead of just trying to be right, which isn't even a thing with these issues. It's all about trade-offs. Very well done, and bummed I couldn't be there in person. I appreciate you guys and your continued pursuit of the facts. So thank you. I did think we did very well at the debate. I did not think our counterparts did all that well. One of them was particularly very mean and nasty and did not get good feedback in the comments of the live stream. But that's one reason I don't really love debates, because I would rather have a conversation, because my intention is always to move people, right? I always want to find common ground and move people on an issue. And I feel like you can often do that in a conversation, but when it's a debate, the very premise of it is sort of to get people to dig in their heels and do get out. So I don't always love that format, but I did enjoy this one. So make sure you check out the video if you haven't.
Well, people like a good fight, and they liked yours. And this is Thin White Axe agreeing with you, Hannah. Says, couldn't agree more with Hannah. I was also homeschooled and a voracious reader, including of Dahl's work. And we're talking about the Willy Wonka author that's so controversial now. It is outrageous how they're tampering with his work, and I hope they continue to receive backlash for it. For those who don't know, Willy Wonka and some of the other works are now gone woke, and they're trading out whether there's genders, and pretty ridiculous, but it looks like you got a fan there, Hannah, on that subject.
Yeah. Well, also on that same segment, someone said, Rob asked, he said, people are finding any single piece of history in current times to be offended. They lead a sad existence and will never be happy playing the victim. How about trying to contribute something positive to society like these writers have? Oh, wait, that's too hard. And I agree with that. I just, who has the time to sit there and go back and word police these old narrative words? I just can't imagine how vapid and boring your life must be if this is where your energy and mind is directed.
And it's just, Salman Rushdie was right. Like, it's just a crime to literature and humanity, if you want to go that far. User metal evolution. I like your tag there. Can we still use the word insanity? If so, I'd like to use it at great lengths here. That's a good way to describe what you just described in that email and we're talking about in general.
Mm-hmm. Also in relation to the debate, DG said, you and the red team did amazing at the college walkaway debate. Hope you do more. We do too. We actually told them that we'd love to do more stuff with them. We enjoyed being on the college campus. Brad and I tried to do a man on the street style video while there though. And the number of students that were just flat out terrified to talk about their views on camera was sad, honestly, pretty sad.
Aren't colleges and universities where debate and intellectual life and pursuits are supposed to happen? It seems like everybody's scared to talk now, aren't they?
Yeah, and I actually found out the Libertarian group that's on campus there, they told me that FIRE, which is a free speech organization, rated University of Washington as the least free speech campus in the country. So you can kind of see that environment.
Surprise me.
Yeah, they're just terrified to discuss their views, which is really
They've
sad.
suffocated intellectualism on campus, and that's sad.
Right.
Lost all my money. I was overthinking that. Had this to say, not forming a family with a man is what is making it harder for you to retire. You want men's resources without the responsibility of earning them, i.e. transfer of wealth and resources from the fascist divorce and family courts. So your thoughts on that, Hannah? What's with that?
This is in response to the video Brad and I critiqued last week of the girl saying she'd never get to retire. And I thought there was just a thought wrong with this comment that I wanted to address, which, it's first and foremost saying that not forming a family with a man is what is making it harder for you to retire. Now, obviously, joint incomes are better than one, but women are doing pretty good economically in our society, right? Their wages have caught up with men. They are more likely as single women to own a home than a single man is. So I disagree here that a woman has to marry a man and have a family in order to be able to retire or to have economic prosperity. In fact, if you have kids, you're going to have a whole lot less money for a significant period of your life. So those are choices and trade-offs to be made. I'm not criticizing or saying what you should do one way or the other. I just always sort of balk at anybody telling women you must do this to have happiness. And it's always a man, right? It's never an older woman saying I really regret my choices. You should do this. No, it's always some man, without a profile pic, without a real name, telling women what they need to do. And so I think he's wrong on the facts here. And then he also says the transfer of wealth and resources from the fascist divorce and family courts are part of this. Now, he's kind of, I don't know, he's mumbo jumbling a lot because he says you have to have a family basically to have any prosperity as a woman, but he's also insinuating that women get rich through divorce. So I'm not sure which way it goes here. You're more prosperous if you settle down and have a family, or you're more prosperous if you divorce him and get out of it. But actually, again,
I'm not sure either.
Wrong on the data either way, because divorce is not actually that prudent for most women economically. We actually see single women after divorce fare a lot worse. They tend to not make up their income, whereas divorced men end up making a bit more. So I do agree that the divorce courts are skewed against men in many ways, especially when it comes to custody. And I think that that's wrong. But I disagree that this is how women are just getting wealthy and affluent is by divorce. A lot of women do not benefit economically from that at all. All right.
No, I think it's too complicated to make it one or the other, but go ahead.
Exactly. Well, if that wasn't spicy enough, let's move on to our hot takes. Do you have one ready, Jack?
I do. So the cinematic masterpiece Cocaine Bear just came out, right? It's getting rave reviews. I'm sure it'll be up for Best Picture for the Oscars. Funny fact about this that I thought our listeners would enjoy. That movie is true to the degree that cocaine came out of a plane, got dropped in a place, and a bear ingested it and died. That happened, right? The rest of it is fantasy. It's just a fun movie. The reason I'm bringing it up, that happened in Knox County, Tennessee, where Mayor Glenn Jacobs resides right now. There's a dude on the staff of Mayor Glenn Jacobs that cocaine landed in his backyard. I thought that was pretty funny for us libertarians who love our friend Glenn Jacobs, and this movie's out. So, that happened.
All right. Well, maybe I'll go see the movie for that reason and that reason alone, because it was not on my radar beforehand. Okay. My hot take this week is that if he's 6 foot tall, no, he's not. And let me explain what I mean by that. as a dater, as a young woman out in the world dating, I have gone on many dates, and I'm 5'7", okay? I'm pretty tall, and if I'm in heels, I'm closer to 5'10", 5'11", but I can kind of eyeball a man and tell how tall he is. And the number of men I have seen say on their profiles that they are 6 foot, and you show up to the date and they are absolutely 5'9", maybe 5'10" at best, is 100%. Like, I don't think I've been wrong once. Never once have I met an actual 6 foot man. I don't think they exist. Now, if he's 6'1", 6'2", 6'3", 6'4", tends to be accurate. But 6 foot is a lie. There are no 6 foot men, and it always skews beneath that if they say they're 6 foot. So beware.
They're creating their own luck and wishing themselves into being 6 foot, I guess. I don't know.
I'm like, how does this work out for you, though? Because maybe if a woman like is 5'4" or so, maybe she can't spot the extra 2 inches that you're missing, 3 inches that you're missing. I would still think they could. But I don't know. To me, it's like if I were to post fake pictures of myself and show up, like, how do you think that's going to pan out for you? The person's going to be annoyed that you wasted their time and probably not going to be that attracted to you, and also not attracted to the fact that you lied. So I just don't get,
or think you're crazy.
End goal. Yeah, or think you don't know how to measure yourself. That's not a good look for a grown man.
Right.
If you don't know how to measure yourself, how are you going to hang my curtains? Right? The whole point of having a husband is to do stuff around the house. I can't even trust your measurement skills. This is not going to pan out. So, yeah, stop lying about your height, man. We know. We know. All right, guys, that's a wrap. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Don't forget, leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. We'll read it on the show. You can leave a comment in our YouTube videos. We might catch it there. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Until next week, stay based.